Thank y'all all for coming. This has gotten to be a lot of fun. I'm gonna miss this when we stop doing this. You know, hoping Chris is back on here. He's gonna help answer some questions through the chat while we go through this. But I'm getting a chance to talk about some of my favorite plants, and I should say this is based on a talk I gave to are y'all getting an echo?
No.
No? Okay.
No.
Good. I'm getting a little bit of an echo, so I'm not sure what that is. I am going to I'm going to mute everybody. You can unmute yourself in the bottom left if you have questions or anything like that. Okay? So this is actually based on a talk I gave to the Mid-South Hydrangea Society in Tennessee, Memphis, Tennessee, which I saw, we have at least one person from that group here. So sorry, some of this will be a repeat, but not all of it. Hydrangeas are really interesting plants. Most of us know them by, the Hydrangea macrophyllus and maybe Hydrangea serratas and the PG hydrangeas. But it's actually a pretty large group. Depending on your taxonomists, there's somewhere in the neighborhood of about 70 or so species of them, and more being discovered all the time. They haven't had a really good taxonomic treatment in quite a while. The last major one was really McClintock back in the late 50s, and he went mostly from herbarium specimens. So sometimes you can't tell everything about a plant from herbarium specimens. When some DNA work was done with hydrangeas, what's found is that they're the group Hydrangeaceae, the family, is paraphyletic, which means that, well, paraphyletic and polyphyletic. The evolutionary lineages, relationships aren't really well represented by the genera that we have. So really, with the newest work, some taxonomists are moving basically everything in Hydrangeaceae into Hydrangea as a genus. So that's Schizophragma, the false climbing hydrangea; Decumaria, our native form of climbing hydrangea; Platycrater, Diananthe, Pileostegia, Dichroa, Rusacea. All those are getting put into hydrangea. So I did not include all of those in here, but hydrangea could become a really big genus in the coming years, as more people more of that evolutionary relationship is better understood. So it could be a lot of changes, and that makes sense. There are hybrids between Dichroa and Hydrangea macrophylla, and there are hybrids between some of the climbing hydrangeas and their relatives. So it kind of does make sense, but it will be interesting to see how that all plays out. We're still keeping everything separate, and I'm talking about all hydrangeas in the in McClintock's sense for this. All right, we're going to jump into it, and let's see. All right. What are y'all seeing my PowerPoint? Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Yep.
Excellent. This is what I'm going to talk about are hydrangeas that you don't see very often. I'm not going to go into kind of the old-fashioned ones, although here to start off, I'll go ahead and get it out of the way with your macrophylla hydrangeas. If you want pink flowers, or if you want blue flowers, you need acidic soils because they need iron and aluminum to really get that blue color. And in acidic soils, there is the iron is more available to be taken up. It's in the soil environment. So in basic soils, iron and aluminum is held very tightly onto the soil particles, and so the plants can't get it, and so they tend to go pink, which is why sometimes in nursery mixes, blue hydrangeas will be more pink. People say, well, they're in pine bark, and pine bark has is very acidic, has a low pH, and that's true, but there isn't iron or aluminum in that pine bark mix. So blue in acid soils, pink in basic soils. The color of a hydrangea is a factor of the aluminum and iron, and also genetics. So some blue hydrangeas will tend to stay blue even in basic soils and vice versa. The other big question for hydrangea macrophylla is when to cut it back. You can cut it back, best time is shortly after it flowers. You cut it back, but even during the winter, you can cut back down to about the third or fourth set of big fat buds on the stems, and it will still flower for you. So I got that out of the way. I will answer more questions on that at the end if people are interested. But. All right. So we do have a slide list. It is, you can see it at the top there. Chris will let y'all all know that as well if you get in touch with him. Next week we will meet at the same time and same address. So let's get into it and talk about hydrangeas. I've always loved hydrangeas. You know, they're the big blue flowering shrubs in front of old houses down through the South. I think are gorgeous, and I still think they're amazing. I know some people get jaded by them and say, "Oh, they're too," you know, they're kind of gaudy, which I like gaudy, and they don't look natural. That color isn't natural, which I say, well, it is natural. So how does it not look natural? I still love them, but you know, that's not really what you see in the wild. When you're going out and looking in the wild, you know, this is more what you see. This is Hydrangea paniculata, the old PG hydrangea, you know, that people have grown for years as big shrubs or small trees, you know, limelight, and there's a million cultivars now. But, you know, you got to take this and then imagine what it looks like when you actually put it out in some sun and give it good soils and do that kind of thing. It's quite a different animal there. You know, or this, trying to figure out what this 15-foot tall old hydrangea is with just some old seed heads. It gets very difficult out in the wild. And in fact, most of the time when I see them in the wild, I kind of mentally put them in two kind of camps. There's the Chinensis type and there's the Aspersa type, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But they can be it can be kind of odd to figure out what they are. So this is the Chinensis type. And depending on who you are looking at, the nomenclature and the ID for these is a mess. But the Chinensis types tend to have smaller, narrower leaves, very thin textured, and then lace caps generally with white flowers. This is probably Hydrangea Chinensis variety Formosana, because it's the Taiwan form. But you can see that's a pretty plant right there, and that one is one that's growing in the wild. Doesn't really hold up to our modern big leaf or French hydrangeas, but still quite a beautiful plant. And there's a lot that kind of fall into this group. Hydrangea grossa serrata is usually lumped into Chinensis, but those real heavily margined, almost ciliate leaf margins on there, they're tooth-like, and then the petals, these notched petals, really distinctive on grossa serrata, and it tends to have a pretty large sterile floret. So when we're talking about hydrangeas, these are the fertile flowers right here in the middle, and then these are the sterile florets. So our mop-head hydrangeas are just masses of those sterile florets. It's a little misleading nomenclature because often right here in the middle of these sterile ones, there actually are fertile flowers in there. But the grossa serrata, I mean, that's a pretty little flower right there, I think. I like the lace caps. I like that delicate kind of look to them.
So would those be called the white, would that be sepals then?
Those are sepals, yeah. And they get that distinguished, they're distinguished, they're called sterile just because these are fertile and not don't have those sepals. But they're pretty plants. We'll see some different ones, but that's very closely related to Chinensis. There's other ones, Presley, which is sometimes bounces, sometimes you see it as umbellata. And those, the flowers, the flower heads are really not in umbels, but it's a little closer to that. Interestingly, whenever I see this, I've seen it in the wild, it often has 3 petals as opposed to 4, but it will have some with 4 of those sepals petals in there. But you see, this is pretty typical in this, where the fertile florets kind of sit up higher and the sterile ones hang down. You see that with that umbellata, as opposed to this, where they're sitting up, kind of almost more flat than that. And most of these probably are more for the collector than anybody else. I think sometimes that hydrangea has been a victim of its own success. I think most people would look at that and say, hey, that's a pretty flowering shrub, except for we know hydrangeas as these, big blue and pink mop head things. And so they, this doesn't get as much love as it would if it were not a hydrangea. And there's a close-up of that Presley or umbellata. And you can see here, actually, there's 4 petals on that one and 3 on this one. And other was Chinensis from a small area in Guangxi. This is kind of interesting because very few of these Chinensis types, and you can again see this thin leaf, this has got a little bit thicker texture. This is kind of a little bit more between the Chinensis types and Macrophylla. But typically, these Chinensis types will have white sterile florets, and then either white to kind of creamy yellow fertile florets, whereas this Guangxiensis has these pink ones. My understanding is the color does not change on this very much. It won't really go to blue in more acid soils, but I've never tried that. So you can give that a shot. Now, the other big group that I often kind of lump them to get in when I'm in the wild is the Aspersa types. And these names get, sometimes are even worse than the Chinensis. In some cases, they're all lumped, kind of a bunch of our lumped as one species with subspecies and varieties. Other times are not. What you mostly get are very large leaves on usually big plants. These are usually, you know, 6, 8, 10 plus feet tall and wide. So not easy for the smallest gardens to have. But they'll have wide leaves, often with hairs, and the types of hairs are often a distinguishing feature on them. And then these large flower clusters, usually white to pale pink lavender, sterile florets, and then some lavender or pink fertile florets, although some of them are white. Involucrata is one that's been grown for a long time. It's a bit confused, but it's got really enormous flower buds, some of the biggest ones. And so they'll start showing these flower buds pretty early in the season. And against that big foliage, you have these almost golf ball size white buds that are on there that open up to these big kind of dome-shaped lace cap heads. I think it's one of the best. We have one in our lath house that's, the cultivar name is Wimrooten. It's sold as Blue Bunny, which is a terrible name. It's a big plant, but it's a dwarf one. You know, it grows 4 or 5 feet tall and 6 or 8 feet wide. But when it's in bud, if I'm out there by the lath house, people are always asking, you know, what is that? What is that? It does not look like a hydrangea, but it's a very, very cool thing. And I meant to put pictures of it in here and just, it slipped my mind. Another one in the group is Hydrangea robusta, often put as a subspecies of Aspersa. Robusta tends to have these very wide leaves, often has reddish colorations in the stems and petioles, and more of a cordate or heart-shaped edge to base to it. The problem is Robusta growing in different areas sometimes has fairly different morphology. I work a lot in China with somebody who's collecting hydrangeas all over the place in China for a Shenzhen botanic garden. And he'll send me pictures, and, you know, he'll send me 2 different pictures and tell me they're both Robusta, and boy, they look different to me, or that they're both Chinensis and look very different. So I still have a pretty hard time telling these plants a lot. And a lot of it, when you do that, you need to use a lens and really look carefully at that, because some of the distinguishing characteristics are there a lot of hairs or not too many hairs on the bottom of the leaf? Are the hairs branched or are they not branched? And let me tell you, you got to get down in there close, get to know your hydrangea pretty well if you want to see whether the hairs on it are branched or not. Hydrangea sargentiana is another one. I really like this. I don't know if I have a good shot of it in flower, but this is one you can distinguish because it is hairy. It is the hairiest of the bunch. It gets these really stout twigs and petioles that are just covered densely in these hairs, and then that nice kind of doubly serrate margin. And then as opposed to like Involucrata, which has this smooth big bud, this has more of a kind of a gnarly bud. You can kind of see that this is going to open up to a bunch of open flowers like that, like a big lace cap. Love these plants, and I love places where they're allowed to grow big, in gardens. Some of the old English estates have these from early collections, and so they'll have these 15-foot by 15-foot plants of hydrangea, Involucrata, and sargentiana, and these, and it's just absolutely striking. I'm starting to garden at home in my woodland, and this is one of the these big hydrangeas are one of the things that I really want to be able to use in there, because I haven't been able to grow the really big honking ones in a while. And hydrangea longipes, another one that is pretty easy to tell if you can get it in flower. Almost all of these big leaf type hydrangeas, and when I say big leaf, I don't mean like hydrangea macrophylla, the big leaf hydrangea. I mean these ones with really enormous leaves, 8, 10, 12 inches long and 4 to 8 inches across. Longipes has the white sterile flowers, but also the fertile florets are white as well, and that really distinguishes it from most others. There's some other characteristics, but that is it. Had a long argument with actually the person who collected this about what it actually was, and he kept telling me, no, it's not longipes, it's not longipes. And finally I sent him a picture of it in flower, and he said, oh yeah, that might be longipes. So you can tell, but you look at those leaves, they're huge leaves. And then those great big flower clusters. That's a pretty nice plant. And then variety fulvescens has supposedly slightly darker hairs on the leaves and stems. This one has started to flower in the lath house. I want to see it again to really see those flowers. I would have looked at that initially and said maybe Robusta, but this variety fulvescens possibly. It's not easy. I wish it was easy to tell what everything was. I wish I could identify everything just by looking at it, but it takes a lot of time to get these things identified correctly. Now, perhaps my favorite, and one that I've killed a couple of times and need to try again, it should grow just fine for us, is this Hydrangea Shikokiana. This is from Shikoku and Honshu and some other islands of Japan. It's got these big leaves, but then it's like it's almost wanting to be our lace leaf, our oak leaf hydrangea with these big leaves. And then it gets these, comparatively speaking, pretty piddly flower heads. So perhaps not to be grown for the flowers. But like I said, hydrangeas get this stigma that they got to have big old flowers for because they're hydrangeas. If this didn't have flowers at all, I would grow it just for this foliage. I think that's amazing foliage. So I want to try it again. Not sure what the secret is with it, but I think maybe I try and grow it too wet. I think maybe those leaves make me think it needs more moisture than it actually does. I think I perhaps rot it out, but definitely want to give it another shot. Now, then there's some other assorted ones. Another one that I fell in love with, I was actually with the former assistant director of J.C. Ralston Arboretum back in 2006. Before I started working here, we were in Japan and we came across this hydrangea and I fell in love with it. I grow it at my house, I grow it here. I love it. It's Hydrangea hirta, and we actually don't call it a hydrangea here. On our labels, we call it powder puff shrub. And that came from a conversation Todd and I had about this plant, in that we both felt like it was an amazing looking thing. But because it's a hydrangea, it's supposed to have these big, blousy flowers. So it's basically like a Hydrangea macrophylla. It's a little bit smaller leaf, but glossy leaf like they have, without any of the sterile fronds. And I think, if you didn't call this a hydrangea, people would think it's an amazing shrub. People grow ageratums and things that have kind of similar flowers. You put this on a nice little, 3 to 4 foot shrub. It's nice and tidy. I just think it's an amazing plant, and it always bums me out that nobody in kind of the mainstream horticulture is willing to do anything with it. But got to have those flowers. Now, Hydrangea scandens, subspecies Chinensis. There's some taxonomists who put all the Chinensis types into scandens. They call them Hydrangea scandens, subspecies Chinensis, variety Chinensis, variety labii, variety. It doesn't really help you out much. But this is a small leaf, small flowered plant. It's, in honesty, you know, it's not the most attractive thing in most cases. I've seen it grown a couple times where it looked really good. Yeah, and there are flowers. Flowers from it.
Is it a leathery leaf? It looks glossy.
Yeah, it's glossy and very small. It's a tiny leaf. And really probably with a plant like this, your best thing is to cut it back regularly. And, you know, I don't know. Otherwise, it's just kind of sprays all over this place. It will try to climb trees. Scandens means something that is scandent is kind of somewhere between a vine and a shrub. So usually when you hear that word, you know, it's kind of a sprawly plant. But what it does in the wild is it grows near other plants that are low branched, and it kind of goes up through there and doesn't climb using, you know, tendrils or you know, roots or anything like that, but just uses other plants to support it as it goes up. And, you know, if you have another plant that's, you know, maybe flowers at a different time of year that you want to grow this up through, it would be kind of an interesting way to do it. And that small leaf would give you some textural difference when both plants are leafed out. Yeah, but the flowers are not terribly showy on it.
Those are strange looking flowers, I must say.
Well, you know, if you get really up close and personal with the sterile flowers, the fertile flowers in a hydrangea, this is pretty much what they look like. Now, I will say hydrangea comes from hydra, you know, water, and then I don't know what the Latin is for the second part, but what it hydrangea, I don't know. But what it translates to is like urn, a water pitcher, water urn, and it's for this shape of the plant right here. And then when it sets seed, you still usually keep most of this structure here, and the seed's all inside, and they'll pour out. And the seed of most hydrangea is like dust. You collect one dry flower head, and you could have, you know, thousands of seed out of there. For those people who know Latin, I apologize to you for my, you know, semi-knowledge. A little learning is a dangerous thing. Now to kind of another group, which is fascinating to me. It's in McClintock's taxonomy, the older taxonomy. This is section Canidia. And most of these are climbing hydrangeas. The one that we typically grow, if you grow a climbing hydrangea, true climbing hydrangea, you're probably growing Hydrangea anomala. And I'll show a few of those in a bit. But there are other ones. Hydrangea integrifolia is Taiwanese, and possibly reports say integrifolia grows in the Philippines, which I find very odd because on Taiwan, integrifolia only grows up on the mountains, and it grows pretty high elevations. So it seems odd that it would be growing in the Philippines as well, but perhaps it is. This is it after flowering. You can see in here, these are some of the old flowers that are, you know, starting to turn into good seed. But it can be a big honking plant. This is it as it grows up. You can see as a young plant, it has these really big leaves. As it gets older, sometimes it'll get smaller as it kind of branches out. If you think about what ivy looks like as it grows up a tree and kind of changes morphology as it gets more mature. This is more of a close-up of the foliage, and you can see integrifolia because it doesn't have any serrations or anything on there. Funny thing is, if you see it as a seedling, the leaves are really serrated or dentate. It's not till it gets kind of an in-between phase that they actually start to become entire. And this is the bud. And when I was talking about Hydrangea involucrata, the big bud that's like a golf ball, that's kind of the same effect, but you can see it's covered by a couple big scales. Really interesting thing. And I don't, for some reason, have a picture of integrifolia fully open, but this is it approaching fully open. And when it finishes, it'll be 8 inches or so across. It'll have not a whole lot of the sterile florets, but a lot of the others. But I think it's fascinating when it's got these big buds all over it, and then they just start exploding into these huge things on top of that glossy evergreen foliage, which is nice. We have collected some from higher elevations than I think has been in cultivation in the U.S. We've got some that are growing that seem to be doing pretty well. So we really hope we can get some good cold hardy strains. We just need a few really good cold winters to be able to tell for sure. And ideally we'll select one that we put a name on and put out there.
Would it be aggressive climber?
No, it's painfully slow, unfortunately. You know, once it really gets going, it'll be a little bit faster, but I mean, it's not going to be like ivy or anything like that. And we really, you know, you think about the millions of hydrangea macrophylla that are growing in landscapes, and it's just not a plant that you hear about being a problem in terms of seeding around. And that's been our experience with most everything else, that it just hasn't, it just doesn't seem to be a problem at all. This is in the same group, that Conidia group, but integrifolia is the outlier in this group. It's in Taiwan. Pretty much all the rest of the plants in this group are from the Americas, from the New World. This is a group that grows on Caribbean islands through you know, Central America down to Peru. So pretty widespread. And in fact, one of them, and I can't remember which. Oh, I think it's Hydrangea. They changed the name. I think it's now lumped into Peruviana. I can't remember the other name, but this climbing hydrangea is sometimes said to be the prettiest flowering plant native to Costa Rica. And we think of Costa Rica with all the flowering things they have there. That's pretty darn high praise. It's got red pink flowers. I don't have any pictures of it. I've never seen it in flower. It's not hardy in the least bit, but wow, that's pretty pretty high praise. So this is Hydrangea samanii. So this is one that comes from the high elevations in Mexico. So we have this growing here. If we could get a really good hardy form of this or an integrifolia, then maybe it'd be worth getting that Hydrangea samanii to grow in a greenhouse for and get some pollen off of it and pollinate one of these hardy ones and see if we could get some flower color, some different flower color into the white of this. So samanii, another one with those big buds. And then, you know, the flowers are okay. But just think if all these fertile flowers had picked up the pink red from Hydrangea peruviana, it'd be pretty amazing, wouldn't it? So now I'm going to shift from these species hydrangeas, which I have to admit, I really get a charge out of the species hydrangeas, and switch over to some hydrangeas, some slightly more unusual ones that were growing for flowers. So a lot more of the macrophylla and serrata types. So an old one that's been around for a long, long time is this Aisha. And there are a couple now that are like this, but Aisha has these cupped petals on there that just give a really different appearance to the flower. It's one of my favorite of the mop head types. It's been around for quite a while. It's still not seen as much as it should be, but I think it is fabulous. I really do.
Does it look like lilac, or is that just this picture?
It looks a bit like lilac. I mean, lilac has 4 petals on it, like this does. The coloration on Aisha will change based on the pH of the soil. So it tends toward pink, you know, but if you put it in acid soil, it'll go more blue. And this is kind of in a transition kind of area where it's coming out of something without much aluminum or iron in there, where it was pink, and it's just starting to get some of that iron in as a relatively newly planted plant. So it's starting to get blue. So I would anticipate if I'd gone back and taken another picture of this plant the next year, it probably would have been even more blue as the roots got out and were able to take up some of that nutrient. So you'd have to do a lot of work getting your plant to this color if you wanted the lilac color. Does not smell like a lilac. From Japan originally, and then there's been breeding here. There's been a lot of work with these double flowered, especially Hydrangeas serratas, which I think are just some of the lace cap double flowered Hydrangeas serratas. I think are some of the most just elegant plants that are out there. They're so beautiful with that, you know, there's pinks and blues and some picotees and things now. It just absolutely striking. I really like this chandelier. It has very long petioles on each individual flower, and so they do kind of hang over when it's growing. Really, really striking. This one, this Kizato no Hikari, with really narrow, another double with narrow sepals on there on these, and these are truly sterile florets. The fertile ones are underneath. But isn't that great? It starts off with this kind of white center and then ages to kind of all pink. Oh, that is gorgeous. And Yoi no Hoshi, with this really deep color, and then these white flecks through there. A lot of these plants with Japanese names get renamed when they get over here. So some of these could be floating around here with different names, and I just haven't put the two together. And I do like, you know, I say I like these, you know, more delicate ones and these species ones, but a real pretty big mophead big leaf hydrangea is pretty darn nice. I do like the picotees quite a lot, like Early Sensation and Mikako. And that just, that's crazy that's a plant. It's funny, some of these have been bred for the cut flower trade or for, you know, potted floral plants for floriculture. And it's funny, it's like the outdoor horticulture folks and the indoor floriculture folk don't talk to each other at all. And sometimes they'll have these great plants that are being used in floriculture, you know, for, you know, Mother's Day and things like that. And if you actually put those outside, they're great garden plants. It's happened with hydrangeas, it's happened with cyclamen, it's happened with eucomis, all kinds of plants bred for indoor use, you know, kind of disposable, grow in a pot and throw away, that do well outside. And this Mikako is one of those that was originally for indoor use.
Are there any that the deer don't love?
Are there any that the deer don't love?
I'm sure there isn't.
Probably not. Maybe not like the leathery climbing ones like Integrifolia and Semanii. Those would be tough to eat. I think some of the big leaf, some of the Aspera types might be a little bit better. they have those big, really felty leaves and then big flower clusters. This one was one we collected in Taiwan in 2009. And consistently, it has had the darkest fertile florets of really just about any that I've seen in cultivation. So doesn't have many of the sterile, but just enough to really offset that dark. And that's one that I've been looking at that for its flowering that I think perhaps we'll put a name on and introduce. I really like that one. And this is one of those ones that's got those big leaves. It grows fast, stout stems that might make it past deer, you know, as long as you get it past the stage where it's small. Once it's big, you know, I think you'd probably be okay, but
Maybe.
Another species, Hydrangeas strigosa. It's also often, I first learned it as Hydrangea aspera subspecies strigosa, but now usually put in its own genera. It's got these more narrow leaves, but still kind of big felty. But Hydrangea strigosa always has these lace caps like Hydrangea aspera. And it wasn't until I got this one, this was one that Heronswood Nursery used to sell, called Elegant Sound Pavilion, which was the translated name of the where this was collected near, that has mop head flowers on an aspera. It's floating around a little bit. You can sometimes find it. There's another one that's supposed to be doubled that was collected in another spot called Golden Needle. It's collected on a mountain called Golden Needle, the translated name Golden Needle. Except for when we got that, when it flowered, it wasn't double. So I don't know if I haven't seen the original one in flower, but I have seen pictures of it in flower. So it should be double, but I guess buyer beware on that. But still, it's almost the effect of a PG hydrangea, those big flower heads. That blew me away when I the first year it flowered. There you go. You can see those flowers, and you can see in the little center bits, the bits that are either still fertile or trying to be. You can see some of that coloration from the Aspera strigosa kind of parentage that it comes from that. If you look at a PG hydrangea, you won't see that in there. But kind of neat. Now, for flowers, I also want to mention one of our natives, Hydrangea arborescens. We have a handful of native hydrangeas. In the broadest sense, you could say we have two, Hydrangea arborescens and Hydrangea quercifolia, the smooth hydrangea and the oak leaf hydrangea. But really, there's several of the plants that have been separated off as forms of Hydrangea arborescens are generally considered their own species now. So you have Hydrangea cinerea and Hydrangea radiata, along with Hydrangea arborescens. So in the flora of North America, it lists 4 native hydrangeas in there. But this one, Mary Nell, was found up in Ohio, and it has the largest flower heads I've ever seen on a Hydrangea arborescens. That flower head is 12 inches across. It's huge, dinner plate size. And I'm told when you get a whole plant with this, this was our plant, I only have one stalk with that on top. I'm told it is just spectacular when you get a bush in flower. They don't, when you start getting more flowers, they drop from 12 inches to maybe 8 or 10 inches, but still pretty amazing plant. Mary Nell. One thing that always confuses people is when to cut back your hydrangeas. Hydrangea arborescens, the smooth hydrangea, you can cut back to the ground every winter and let it resprout, and it will flower for you. So it makes it a little bit easier for people, especially people who really like cutting things back. I'm more like letting things go. Another form of hydrangea arborescens that has several different names floating around: emerald lace and green dragon. I don't know which one is people finally landed on. This is more for foliage. You're growing this one for foliage. The flowers are all fertile, so not super showy. There'll be a few sterile florets on there when it opens up, but this this jagged leaf is very different than kind of anything else that's out there in terms of our native hydrangea arborescens. So it's a very cool little plant for textural purposes. Probably great if you're growing nothing but native plants and you want something, you know, different in there to upset your really strict native plant friends. Or if you're like me and you like the oddities in a group, if you want a really great flowering shrub, you could probably find better than emerald lace, but it is cool. But other foliage ones, some of these big leaf ones like the strigosas and asperas have got purple foliage. Now this is one that was collected on Gongshan in the Himalayas. That's got this really reddish foliage. I was really excited to see that in southern England. I'd love to have been able to take a piece back with me, but hydrangeas from England are pretty tough to get back. And there are other ones, this Aspera, the larger leaf called Titanius, that has some reddish coloration to it, which is pretty cool. And because you get that red naturally in some of the wild collected forms, it's no surprise that at some point a purple-leafed Aspera was put out. I saw this first in Japan back in the mid-2000s with the name Burgundy Bliss in Japan on it. So I think it had been named in Europe maybe. But it is what appears to be the exact same plant is in the country under several other names. Hot chocolate was a name. There's another trade name that it was put under that I can't remember what it was. You know, like a lot of purple leaf plants in the Southeast, it does go green quicker than we would like. It seems that this form isn't quite as hardy as some of the other Aspera forms that we have. I think it's probably a 7B plant at best. And that's probably why you don't see it as much. It was probably really touted. It was sold where it shouldn't have been sold, and they died. And so people, you know, kind of went by the wayside, but it's still floating around a little bit if you can track it down. You know, best if you can get it some morning sunlight and then shade, you get your best color on there. But it's a cool plant. And even if you just have that purple when it leaves out and then it has pretty flowers, that'd be enough for me.
What do the flowers look like, Mark?
You know, they're typical Aspera. So you get kind of that ring of sterile florets around kind of a pink center mass of fertile florets. Another one that you grow for kind of both flowers and foliage is Hydrangeas serrata Benny. Benny just means red in Japanese. So again, you'd have to beware if you get one just labeled Benny. But if you get the best forms, this is taken on June 6th. So these are not these are not flowers that have really gone way past and faded. Now they're not fresh, but that's as red as you will ever see on a hydrangea for the flower. And you can see that intense color comes in through the leaf as well. So it will ultimately go a little bit more green, but then it turns red again in the fall. Really neat plant. If you can track down the real thing. If you do, tell me. I'll chip in on the purchase price for you if I can get a piece. And there are other foliage colors, you know, you get gold. The true Hydrangeas serrata ogon is a little bit hard to find. Again, ogon just means yellow in Japanese, so kind of a generic name, but was put on as a cultivar name. There are several of the big leaf hydrangeas with yellow or chartreuse foliage. Some of them are just renames. Lemon zest is really just ogon. And you can see here's one growing very close by that has blue flowers, and then lemon zest has pink flowers. And this is one of the ones where genetics plays a role. This one always seems to want to be pink. The true ogon lemon zest wants to be pink. There's a couple other yellow leaf ones that may be different. I haven't grown really to be able to tell. But you know, wouldn't this be nice with that yellow chartreuse with that blue on it? Be a whole lot nicer than pale pink on top of the yellow, but no such luck. This is one that you really need to make sure you don't have in full sun, or else it'll burn. I'm not reading comments, but every once in a while I get a thing that says there's a comment. I'm always hoping it's somebody who's telling me I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, please tell me. If you have other experience, I love that. I love to learn more. We have a gold form of our own native oak leaf hydrangea. Little Honey is a great plant. It's been around for a while. It's comes off of peewee, so it's a dwarfer form of oak leaf hydrangea. This is it fairly early in the season. This is it later in the season, where it goes from kind of this, you know, almost acid yellow green to a richer gold. It's happy. I think this is one of the best gold leaf plants, period. There just aren't many that can compete with it in terms of just being really, really showy.
And it can handle sun because it's quercifolia, right?
It can handle sun. You know, like other quercifolia, it will kind of flag a bit if it's really hot and dry. I like it in a bit of shade. I think it looks better. I think Little Honey can look a little rough by the end of the season if it's in full sun, but it can certainly grow there.
What kind of mature size is it? What kind of mature size is it, Mark?
What kind of mature size? So the 10-year size on it, on Little Honey, is probably 5, if you don't cut it back at all, 5 to maybe 6 feet tall if it's really happy, by 8 feet wide, 6 to 8 feet wide. And that's if you don't cut it at all. You know, it'll do these kind of longer shoots, and you could cut that out, cut out, you know, this tall shoot right here and this one right here, and you know, your plant would be a lot smaller. So you can do that by selective pruning on there if you want to, but oh, that's so nice.
I have one of those in shade and one in more sun. The one in shade goes greener in the summer. The one in more sun in the winter, it's sort of like oh, what's that Elysium that Tony
Florida
Evans?
Sunshine?
I'm sorry?
Florida Sunshine Elysium?
Yeah, like Florida Sunshine.
Floridata?
No, like Florida Sunshine Elysium. In the winter, in sun, it gets almost like a parchment color to the yellow, you know?
Yeah.
And then I really like the Little Honey in the fall because it gets really pretty, you know, deep red foliage, and this winter it hung on to it all winter long. It never lost it.
Yeah. Well, we didn't have winter this year, did we?
No.
We had it at least one night, that was for sure.
I have a orchid, a Dendrobium kingianum, that came back after this winter. That is not hardy. That is not a hardy orchid. It should not be coming back, but it did. I will say I have seen a picture of a gold leaf hydrangea arborescens, but I've never actually seen the plant. I haven't been able to get my hands on it or really even verify if it's really exists or it's just chlorotic, but I hope so. And then there are quite a few variegated ones. Hydrangea, Macrophylla Hatsushimo is a really beautiful one. It's maybe my favorite of the really boldly variegated ones. Hydrangea Summer Frost is a hybrid between Macrophylla and Serrata, that the new growth is white and then it goes green. You can see kind of what it looks like. I think that's a very cool plant. Early in the season, it looks like a Macrophylla. Later, it looks more like a Serrata in terms of foliage. I've actually never seen it flower, so hoping to see that soon, but I think that's a neat plant. My favorite variegated one, though, is this Amacha Nishiki. Should be Amacha Nishiki, with this like yellowy stippling over the whole leaf. It's a real small little Hydrangea serrata. Usually only grows about 2 or 3 feet tall and a little bit wider. These nice little delicate lace caps, but I just love that stippled look on there. Even people who don't like variegation sometimes like this one. The only PG hydrangea, only Hydrangea paniculata I'm going to show, this is Yukigeshu. This is one that has kind of stippling and splashing all over the leaves. It's kind of a pretty plant. You can grow it out in sun. We could have it in full sun. It hadn't bothered it at all. The panicle hydrangeas in general are the most sun tolerant of them all. There's a lot of them out there. They're great. To me, for whatever reason, I don't love them as much. And I get to talk about the plants I love in these Wednesday talks. So I did see another one that was called Yellow Splash before, but the more I've grown Yukigeshu, the more I'm wondering if they're the same thing, because Yukigeshu, it can have all kinds of different leaves on there. I think probably different, but it may have just been a sport from Yukigeshu that was taken off and is doing more splashing and less of the stippling on it. Was not very stable, but there's other things out there. The more typical climbing hydrangea, Hydrangea anomala, has a couple of variegated forms. This early light with a white margin around each leaf, and summer snow with the stippling on there. The biggest problem with both of these is the new growth looks really cool. And when you get it in a pot and it's been clipped back and it's growing on a little support, you get all this new growth on there and you're like, wow. And you plant it out and about 2 or 3 inches of the new growth looks really showy, and then it just goes green. You can see all the older foliage in here is all solid green. This is a little bit better, but it goes green. So it's not super effective if once it gets big, you just have the tips that have the variegation and the rest of it doesn't. It's really something that you have to kind of cut back pretty regularly so that there's a lot of vigorous growing points to really get the variegation to show up a lot. Better, this is the one non-true hydrangea I'm putting on here, is Schizophragma hydrangioides. There's one called Ivory Magic. I don't know why it needed to be spelled with a K, but Ivory Magic, that has this really broad, really regular variegation on there. Now that is a showy plant when it's growing. And I don't want to leave out another one of our natives, Hydrangea arborescens. This pink pincushion was grown for a while. This is one that will rarely ever have any sterile florets. It's all fertile, but it had some pink coloration in there, which is nice. And then somebody else found another pink form that was, again, mostly just a pincushion head, didn't have the many of the sterile florets, but gave that plant to Tom Ranney. And between the two of them, Tom bred the first pink flowering smooth hydrangea, the first mop head pink flowering smooth hydrangea called Invincible Spirit. That's Invincible Spirit. So you got this reddish, and to be quite honest, it was a breakthrough plant, but it was kind of an okay plant. I'm going to show you a few more where he's really expanded beyond that. But part of the deal with this, when it was introduced, it came in a pink pot, and $1 from every plant sold went to breast cancer research. And as of a year ago or so, it was a while back, they had raised over $1 million. They hit the $1 million mark maybe 18 months ago with this plant for going towards breast cancer research. So that's pretty good. And they could do that because it was a breakthrough plant, and so people would pay that extra $1 that it cost them to purchase this plant. And that is out of NC State. That's Tom Randy's breeding program here from NC State. Since then, he's done more. He's got Invincible Ruby, so it's just a darker colored one, a little bit stronger stems, gorgeous. Here's another picture of it. Actually, I take that back. This is Invincible Spirit. See the smaller florets? This is Invincible Ruby. I put the name on the wrong one with these larger sepals on there. This really looks like the Annabelle, which is the big flowered hydrangea arborescens, the one most typically grown. This is a pink version of that. And then he's got Incredible Blush. Incredible is a series from Proven Winners. The first one, just Incredible, was not from Tom Randy, but it has just massive white heads on really sturdy stems. And then this Incredible Blush adds pink to that. But again, it's these really huge heads on there that are so amazing. So really cool stuff with our native plants coming out of our breeding program at NC State. What's interesting when you look at the really recent genetic work on hydrangea, and you start looking at relationships, where things really line up in terms of when they evolved from each other, you start getting a better sense of which ones might actually cross that we thought weren't very closely related, and reasons why some that we thought could cross just never will because they're too far apart. So there could be some really neat things coming up soon. So thank you all for listening to me talk about hydrangeas. Man, I meant to get this shorter again. I did an hour again. I really appreciate y'all doing this, being part of this. And now I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
I have a question about bloom times.
What?
Is it possible to have them have several and have some bloom in spring, summer, and fall?
Well, they don't start in early spring. They typically start in later spring, and sometimes it depends a bit on the weather. It depends a bit on the plant. The easiest way to have them for a longer period over the summer and into fall is to you can, over the winter, you can cut some back just a little bit or not at all, cut out the dead tips or anything, then cut some out. And I'm just talking about just with macrophyllus. Cut some back, a couple of buds back, cut some back a couple more. And then if you also get some of the reblooming ones, Endless Summer is one of them, but Penny Mac, and there are other ones out there, Dooley and things like that. You can cut them back hard all the way to the ground, and they rebloom is what they're known for. But what that means is if they die back, they will bloom on completely new wood. So they'll grow up, and by the time they're ready to flower, most of the other ones are already finished. So it's kind of like with gladiolas. You can take gladiolas and plant some at 2 inches, some at 4 inches, some at 6 inches, some at 8 inches, and have the bloom time go longer. You can also do it. You can do it via how you cut them back. There was a question about any of them having fall color other than quercifolia, and that seems to be specific to certain selections of especially Macrophylla and Serrata. I've seen great color on Hydrangea preziosa, which has some Serrata in it. I've seen great fall color on Endless Summer, but I don't know if they do that every year. It's just now and then it seems like they get good color.
Can you talk generally about, I'm a new gardener, so sun versus shade, are hydrangeas happy in the shade?
Hydrangeas are happy in the shade. You can grow most of the hydrangeas in sun and they will flower very well for you, but usually the foliage doesn't look as good, and hydrangeas will flower well in shade. So, you can sometimes see big old clusters that are growing out in full sun and the leaves are kind of yellowy green, but tons of flowers. If you move that same plant into the shade, you would have nice dark green foliage and lots of flowers. The one exception, Hydrangea paniculata, for it really to perform its best, it wants more sun.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we've got a lot of questions in here. I'm going to try and answer a bunch. People can also call out. There's one asking about where to buy some of these, like Hydrangea involucrata and others. We sometimes propagate them. That's a good spot. Wilkerson Mill, I believe they're still selling them. They're down in Georgia. They've got, they basically just do hydrangeas. They may own hydrangeas.com, or else somebody, I can't remember. That may be Wilkerson Mill. But there are mail order places that will do hydrangeas. Some of the West Coast nurseries, mail order nurseries will have them. Forest Farm, maybe.
Quick comment, Mark.
Yep.
Folks can also propagate their own hydrangeas in our propagation workshops that we have in the summer, in May and June, and then again in the winter. Yes.
Let's see. How do the breeders cross for a new plant? Well, I mean, you take pollen from one plant and put it on the other plant, is in broadest terms. It's a little bit more involved with that. Usually if you have flowers that have both male and female parts, if you got to take off all the male parts so you don't get any pollen on the flower, and you take pollen from the other flower, put it on the female parts of that flower, and then bag it so no other pollen can get in there, because you don't want anything kind of contaminating it. Some plants are really hard to do that with, to move pollen, and so a lot of times you'll just plant them very close together. Sometimes growers will have them in pots, flowering at the same time together, put them under netting with bees. They'll put you can buy little beehives to do that with, and they will pollinate in there. So it's basically, the birds and the bees. How do Dichroa do at the Arboretum regarding hardiness? They're kind of hit and miss. Dichroa are very closely related to hydrangeas, but the fruits are showy. They have blue fruits that are really, really nice. They have not tended to be terribly hardy, but I think that's a selection thing. I think we need to collect some at higher elevations, and I think we could do really well with those. Are there any fragrant varieties? Somebody else want to answer that?
My quercifolias are sometimes have a light fragrance. If it gets big, you can smell it when you walk by.
Oh, I don't know. I have a terrible sense of smells. I've never really smelt them.
Aisha is supposed to have a slight fragrance also.
Okay.
And you have four of us here from Memphis from the Mid-South Hydrangea Society, at least.
Yeah. Well, so I'm glad you're on here. So I don't know if this is Linda speaking or not.
Linda Lanier. I'm the other Linda.
The other Linda. Well, Linda Orton sent me a note that said something about golden penny. I don't know that plant. What? Linda's on there. Somebody else can speak about it.
I have a golden crane, but it doesn't bloom very well.
Ah,
We're trying to get Dr. Durr's green mantle or whatever the new name is on it.
okay.
Enjoyed it very much. Signing off.
Good. Are there any known sources for Mary Nell? That is a really new one. I don't know that anybody is growing Mary Nell yet, but I think they will be. I believe a wholesale nursery in New Jersey was growing it. I know the person who brought me mine brought it to that nursery and gave them a couple plants as well. You could talk to the Morton Arboretum. If you talk to folks there, they may be able to tell you if there's a source up around there for it. Are all these in Michael Durr's manual? Probably not. A lot of the species are not terribly commercial, and that's really geared slightly more towards commercial. Most of them bloom in late spring or summer. Even in Mike Durr's hydrangea book, kind of the species get pretty short shrift in there. All right. Question was, is there a plant list for this talk? There is. Chris can send it out, or I don't know where to get it. When it goes up on YouTube, it'll probably be, we can put the list by there, maybe? I don't know. Chris? Plant list?
What was the question, Mark? Where's the plant list?
Yeah, I know it's up there, but.
It's linked in the announcement for today's presentation. I also included it in the chat earlier today. I'll see if I can get it again.
Okay. The genus name for powder buff shrub that's hydrangea. It's Hydrangea hirta, Hirta. All right. Looks like I've gotten through most of the questions, unless some came in. I don't mind emailed questions. That'll be fine. The slides won't be available.
Serrata O Amatashata, is that it?
I'm sorry?
What was that one? You had H. Serrata O Amatashata, was that it?
O Amacha Nishiki.
Okay.
Amacha Nishiki.
Thank you.
Yeah, and this, so there's some you asked about if the slides will be available. They won't be here, but they'll be put on YouTube, and so look on the JC Ralston YouTube channel, and if you're not a subscriber, you should be. I love emailed questions. Chris put there's the slide list up again.
I posted the wrong one. The second one's the correct one. The video will go live on Monday for today's lecture.
What's that?
The video will go live on YouTube on Monday at 2 p.m.
Okay, there you go, Monday.
Are there general rules about cutting them back? I mean, or is that like too complicated? It's individual plants have their own love and not like.
So hydrangea macrophylla, the one serratas, the ones that most people grow, those flower on new growth from old wood. So if you cut them back too hard, they won't flower. But if you cut them back just down, the two ways to cut hydrangea macrophylla if you want flowers next year are to cut off over the winter, down to about the third set of buds. They have big fat buds. You can see them go from the tip out and go back like 3 buds and then cut right there above the set of buds. And that'll kind of reduce everything a little bit. If they're really big and getting out of hand, you can go in and cut out some of the oldest stems and allow new growth to come up, and that'll also work to reduce the height. If you just need to make it smaller because it's gotten out of hand, you can cut it back hard over the winter and it'll come back. It just won't flower well or at all for you the first year. There are some reblooming forms, like I mentioned, Endless Summer, those that can be cut back hard. And really, in my opinion, the reblooming forms don't do a ton of reblooming for us unless you really are diligent about cutting off the flowers as soon as they're spent. What those are great for are people who live in cold areas where the hydrangeas get killed back in the winter because they will come up and flower. I just haven't seen that there's that much more of a display unless you do a lot of deadheading for the reblooming types. Hydrangea arborescens are native. You can cut that back to the ground every winter. Hydrangea paniculata, you can cut back hard and get flowers every winter, but usually people are growing Hydrangea paniculata to be a bigger plant. Some of those species ones I showed, you wouldn't want to cut them back too hard for them to flower, but you could trim them back.
Thank you.
Mark, this is Linda Lanier in Memphis again.
Uh-huh.
Our flower farm has a wonderful white arborescens called Haas Halo.
Yeah.
To me, it's more beautiful than Mary Nell, and I've had really good luck with it.
Yeah, that's another good arborescence with a really big flower head. Haas Halo, where it's nice about that one, even though it's got that big flower, it usually has a really nice ring of the sterile florets around there. I agree, that's a really good one. And I see a note that Chinensis and Grossus serrata are the same. That's a lot of stuff is lumped into either Chinensis or Scandin's variety Chinensis. Just depends on your taxonomist. In the broadest sense, Grossus serrata is the same as Chinensis, but in a stricter sense, it's certainly different visually. Thank y'all, everybody. If anybody has any more questions, please don't hesitate to send them to me, and keep an eye on our website. We got a lot of stuff going on and new stuff coming up that will be available for online use. So really do keep up with us. There's just a ton happening, and it's so nice to see everybody. Take care.